Well, hey, today I have some slides that I want to practice that I have for a webinar coming up next week on next week, Tuesday, whenever that may be. If I was going to be super cool, I would show you what those slides were. But I am not super cool. So I think I have a link to the actual webinar in the comment stuff there. Actually, I do have these things. Let me show you. Where is, there we go. There should be a link down below. And if there's not, sorry. But I have the series I'm doing with my coworker, Brian Ross, that I think is pretty fun. And this one, we're going to be talking about like the strategy of software. That's not what it is. We're going to be talking about like how we think large organizations can like use software more strategically, kind of weave it into their corporate strategy stuff. I think when I wrote the abstract of this talk, here's a pro tip for you when you're doing a webinar or a talk. If you write the abstract and you're putting together the slides, you can do whatever you want within reason. So I'm not sure if the abstract exactly matches the present content that we have, but who cares? I get to figure out what I want. Here's another thing I wanted to say about talks. I was going to record this to like make into a tiny video. Sorry, I got to adjust my camera here because, why not? Might as well have fun with that. If you're giving presentations a lot, here's a tip that I learned from John Willis. Keep giving the same presentation over and over again. You don't want to have to come up with a new presentation for every single conference you go to. I mean, if it's called for, definitely do that. But what you want to do is curate sort of a stable of slides and stable of narratives that you can use over and over again for even multiple different talks. And you get better and better at presenting each of those slides. And then you don't have to spend very much time rehearsing it or knowing to deliver it well. I mean, think about what a stand-up comedian does where they do the same act over and over again, and they learn what people laugh about, they adjust it. So that's something that you should be thinking about if you're So that's something you should be thinking about if you're going to be presenting things over and over. That's something you should be thinking about if you're going to be doing lots of presentations, is have the same one basically that you give and watch the audience reaction and change the presentation each time. Maybe once a year or so you come up with something new and you just add that to your stable of what you do. So there's a little quick thing maybe I can convert into a short video. Now, let's get to what the slides are. I will show you a little bit. So, there's that again. Now, what I sometimes like to do is, especially when doing a new presentation, is I like to copy the abstract here, make sure I'm actually talking about more or less what I said I was going to talk about. And then I've gone through each slide and just sort of typed out, not really a script, but things that I want to talk about. Now, I don't really ever look at notes or scripts when I'm giving a presentation just because, I don't know, the way I present, there's not really time for that and it would be weird. But it's good to kind of have that, here's actually the first draft. So I kind of just typed out in a bulleted list like what I thought I wanted to talk about. And then as I was making the slides, I would go to each slide and update the script. Now, this is especially good if you're presenting with someone like I'm doing this webinar next week. So first, to get a little lay of the land, you can see the slides that we have there. Got a little call to action here at the end. And we'll see how this pans out. I'm going to keep it in this mode. Let's zoom this out a bunch more. Does that? Oh, fancy. Come down here. Let's smush this up so you get a bigger slide. There's some PowerPoint tips for you. All right. So let's see what I will do here. All right. I actually have something in like 30 minutes, so I'm not going to have a tremendous amount of time to do this, which is probably good. Excuse me. Well, thanks for coming to check out this talk. What Brian and I want to go over is how we think in large organizations, the strategy groups, the organization as a whole, management, executives, should start thinking about how they use software more to fit in strategically to how the business runs. I used to do corporate strategy just for a couple of years. That's as long as I could put up with that fascinating fire hose of learning. And I found that there was a lot of opportunities if you sort of use the best practices of software to improve how strategy was done, which we'll get into here. Now, I like to start more or less with some stories of what the end case is, what success is. And I'll just give you some very briefly here. Here's three that represent an organization, I guess you could say, using software as strategy, right? Using it to deliver on their strategy, but also evolve what the actual strategy is. So first of all, some years ago, Liberty Mutual was opening up a new market for their insurance business, selling motorcycle insurance in Australia. And because they were following the best practices of software, where you come up with a theory of what to do, you add features to it, you deploy it on a weekly or so basis, and you observe people using it, as we'll get into here momentarily, they were able to study the way that people were applying for insurance, but also how agents were on their own end were signing up people for insurance. And for example, one of the things they found when doing this is that if someone was interested in signing up for insurance, it was better to start with the motorcycle, having them put in the types of motorcycles that they had or the one that they had, rather than collecting their demographic data, their names and things like that. And they found that if they changed how they were doing things, that would drive a significant amount of more signups, if you will. They also found a way to optimize the way that the agents were signing people up for insurance. Now, that may seem kind of minor, but the traditional way this software is done, you would have a 6 or 12-month cycle that was determined from some other group what the workflow would be, and you would have missed out on these opportunities to improve and change things. Now, a second example, in a commercial kitchen organization where they're running these big kitchens, is the strategy handed to the development group was to modernize the way they were doing things, to optimize costs and customer experience by digitizing the recipe books, the cookbooks that these chefs were given, so that they would make sure to follow the kind of optimized recipes that they had, the ideal way of doing things. But instead, what the developer team found is they changed the way the strategy of having the company have better customer experience and optimizing the cookbooks was done. First, what they did is they identified that the team in the kitchen was facing a lot of toil checking the ingredients of things like checking the temperature of things like mayonnaise and chicken, making sure that they passed health inspection. I like this story because it's very analogous to governance in IT, right? You want to optimize things, you've got to have audit and compliance. So the team of software developers knew the actual strategy, which was to make the kitchen run more efficiently, to have better costs, and also to deliver the food more consistently, to have good customer experience, to have the food be tasty. And they identified a different way to actually implement that strategy than the centralized, management strategy thinking was specifying. They freed up toil so that the kitchen staff could spend time on those higher quality things. And then as a third example, this is from Orange, big telco company in France in particular, but in Europe. And they were trying to improve the customer experience of small and medium businesses, literally like corner fruit stores, bodegas, as some people would call them, and small stores like that. And they found that I'm kind of forgetting what the use case here is, but now I remember. They were trying to come up with software that would help them improve the customer experience, which helps improve churn, right? Churn is a pretty big, easy thing to do in service, in kind of internet services and cell phone services. You can move around the two of them. And so they found that one of the major things that a small business wanted to know is if they gave out their phones, they had phones for delivery drivers and things like that. They wanted to very closely monitor any overages so that they could ask people to stop using the phone. So through studying the way that these small business owners were using their service, they came up with a way to use software to essentially address that strategy concern, right? So you had a strategy concern. of let's prevent churn, let's have more customer loyalty, and then you have a theory of we'll do that by having our software be better, and then like how are you going to do that? Like you don't really know at a strategy level. So then the software team is able to use actually shipping software and observing how people are doing it to inform that strategy and change it around. Now, those are some very simplistic, well, in aggregate, not simplistic, the whole businesses. But hopefully what you're beginning to see there is that as a company, if you are putting together a strategy of how you want to run your business that year or that 6 months or hopefully even shorter, if you know how to use the cycle of software where you can actually just try things out to discover new ways of running your business as represented by software, and then get feedback about if it works or not, you can hopefully start to imagine what we want to talk about here, that you can dramatically change how you do strategy in your organization, rather than it being the typical annual 12-month cycle of doing strategy where you sort of pass down these often overly vague ideas. We want to optimize how the kitchen runs by standardizing the way cookbooks are done, right? Or we want to enter this new Australian motorcycle insurance business by having the most efficient way to sign up for insurance, so forth and so on, right? Like those kind of strategy things get to be very vague. But if you have excellent competency in software, you can start to really improve the way your strategy is not only executed or implemented, but how you even come up with and guide what your strategy is. Well, first of all, here's us. And in the presentation, we would give a brief bio of ourselves or whatever, but I'm going to skip over that. So let's first start with what strategy is. And this is a little bit of my, personal take on what I think useful strategy is. And I think that not only when it comes to software, to other parts of your business, but especially when it comes to software, you want strategy to be more specific than I think the kind of orthodox strategy think is. Now, if you go and study like, classic strategy, the way it's documented and taught and things like that, there's a certain helpful vagueness in this strategy. You don't want to get too specific in what you're doing. That's kind of at the, as we'll see when we go over OGSM, that is kind of good to leave for the bottom levels. But you do want your strategy to be more than, I was just kind of listening into some people talk about their strategy, and it was like one of their strategy planks or pillars. I think whenever you see the word pillar or plank or thing like that, you're in trouble. Was something like, adopt industry best practices to improve and optimize the execution of our business, or just something that is kind of like doesn't really have a reason behind it. They're always using the word optimize, but control our cost by migrating 70% of our applications to cloud, like things like that. But especially when you're doing software, if your strategy isn't this specific, you want to boil it down to something that is actionable. Something that if you're a software developer, a product manager, one of the people working on putting the strategy into place, you can read it and sort of get a guideline of what it is you should be doing. And this is one of my favorite ones from DBS Bank, a customer of ours from a while ago. And when you read through it, you can see that this idea of our goal is for our customers to live more and bank less, right? Like, which is to say, when you're making the software for it, you want to kind of have it be the fastest, as people would say, frictionless way to do whatever they need with banking, right? So you want to really focus on customer experience and having your customers be able to do what they need to when they use your banking software. This could be something as simple as if you're transferring some money or paying a bill, use autocomplete for filling out the details of what people are doing, right? Figure out the most common things that people want to do and try to surface that, maybe at an individual level, right? And, because like, I don't know about you, but very few people probably log into their banking software and are like, now I want to hang out with the banking software. I'm just going to chill out and have a good time. This is how I'm going to entertain myself. So think about when you're doing strategy, right? Like, how can you make it something that if you were putting together a product, you were doing the business of it, you were a software developer, designer, product manager, that it would be a guide for how you should prioritize things, right? Like, another thing you might say This is a bit of a silly thing in banking because, of course, you want it to be secure. But another thing you might say is we want to have the most secure sort of banking experience possible. And then you might actually make sacrifices in usability and customer experience in favor of security, right? Like you might require using, I have one of these silly little things from my bank. You might require using like one of these little physical things to actually do the multi-factor authentication for your bank instead of not using one of those things, which is a real drag to do that stuff, right? So think about your strategy stating something that guides how people want to do implement their software. And then maybe Brian has something to say here. So to get to that point, let's go over a model that you can have in mind of like what the best way to do software is. And I don't know, depending on the domain you're working in, if you're doing like vehicle control systems, like maybe you have a different way of doing things, but let's look at the kind of like apps, like software most of us encounter. And this is from the recent discussion around developer productivity. It's a great nerd fight going on about that after McKinsey wrote up kind of like their advice on how to track individual developer productivity. But that's a story for another time. But there was this diagram that the two of the rebutters put together that I think was great. It kind of captured a lot of what you want with software development nowadays. And that is, coming up with or spotting something that your customer, you can call it a pain point, something that they want to do. And then you write code around it, and then you, most importantly, like you ship it, you release it, and you observe, once the features are in production, you observe if the customers behave differently, for good or bad, right? Like you've come up with a theory of a problem you're solving, maybe that autocomplete in paying a bill. Does releasing that feature speed up how they're able to do bill pay and transfers or not, right? And once you go through that cycle and you observe it, you see if you're meeting your strategic objectives with how you're doing software, right? Like I think of this as kind of like a small batch process. And once you can go through the cycle every 1 to 4 weeks, I mean, monthly is kind of the extreme end. What you're doing is, again, think about this in terms of strategy. You're even learning and discovering and then validating with actual observing users doing something, what even the problem you're solving is, what the strategic approach for doing it is, what ways you would change and run your business that would actually meet your overall strategic goals there with data, right? So you're not just theorizing that something might be good, which is typically with the way that corporate strategy is done and kind of passed down. You don't really have a lot of resources to experiment. You might work with the big management consulting firms. I don't know why you wouldn't just in-house this stuff, but people don't like doing that. I guess they don't trust their staff or trust their ability to hire staff who could do it on their own, and they don't want to deal with expensing trips and things like that. But you can get people to go out and study and observe how people are doing software. If you know the jobs to be done theory, there's a great lore about going out at fast food restaurants and figuring out why milkshake sales were so high in the morning, because people wanted a nourishing thing that was quick and delicious and wouldn't spill all over them when they were driving. So you can do that kind of exploration, but if you think about it at scale, if you already have an existing user base, they're already using software, like in the online banking thing, you can use them as an experiment base. Like you can even use some of the power of cloud native software to just try it with, 1% of your organization. You can try different ways of doing something, one with do A/B testing, one with, 1,000 people over here and 1,000 people over there, and figure out the best way to implement your strategy, even figure out the problems that they have. But you need this cycle in place, this ability of your developers at the beginning of the week to kind of come up with an idea, a little feature they want to put, to code it up, test it, verify it, deploy it, and then observe people using it. And then you get a huge amount of data validation and feedback that goes right into your strategy process. Now, another thing to consider, right? Like why this way of doing software, this, you can call it a lean design way, a design way, agile. I would just call it like doing a small batch approach to software or doing software in a good way. Another thing to think about when it comes to strategy is, everyone's kind of familiar with this. It's more or less a cliche at this point. But I think especially if you are in management or strategy and you're kind of like you're not really thinking about or know what the benefits of using software directly for strategy are, this is a good representation of another reason why it's valuable. Not just the feedback coming in so you can shape it, but if you think about, one of the ways I think about strategy is that at the organization level, and I talk in terms of commercial organizations. If you're in the nonprofit, whether that's government, military, or non-government organizations or whatever, it's not necessarily profit and cash flow and things like that you're focused on. You're focused on achieving a mission within the boundaries of costs and compromises and constraints that you have. So let's just talk in commercial terms to make it easy. But what you're doing with strategy in a large organization is you're figuring out really how you're allocating scarce corporate resources. And those resources, of course, are money, investment, but it's also time that you're spending, right? Like the time that you spend figuring out, how to get better customer experience with your small business owners is time that you're not spending getting better customer experience with your residential users, your commercial facing people. So part of what you're doing in strategy is using that scarce resource of corporate attention and also like corporate priority. I mean, these are all kind of money, attention, priority are all kind of, you have a very limited or a relatively limited amount in a large organization. And the strategy group is trying to figure out where to place bets, where to do that, right? Now, that's a very risky thing, right? And that's why, like when I was in strategy and people would do strategy, you spend a brain-numbing and melting amount of time on charts and slides and talking with people. And then also kind of like covering your posterior to get alignment from all of the people in the company and get their buy-in so that if something goes wrong, everyone has had a chance to weigh in. And if something goes right, what do they say? Success is there are many parents when it comes to success, and all of a sudden your strategy ideas are orphans when there's failure. But you're not so much managing the risk of failure in a good way, but you're managing the blowback of failure by doing this. And for decades, this has been all you can do, right? You do a lot of studying and theorizing up front. But you can see kind of with this chart, if you're doing something on a 12-month cycle, you build up this risk over time because you don't actually know if you've made a good investment until you get your strategy in production, so to speak, until you get your software in production and you observe people using it and how it affected the business. So instead, if you're releasing your software more frequently, again, I would recommend every week to 4 weeks, you're validating if your assumptions were correct in that period of time, and you're de-risking what you're doing. You can see that in the kind of shark teethy kind of thing. I think a shark tooth thing is supposed to be in the middle instead of at a 90-degree angle, but whatever. And so each time you release that small batch, you're building up risk, but a smaller amount. And then you can, if you were wrong, you can try something again. You build up the risk. It comes down when you get input on it, and so forth and so on, right? So this is another reason why thinking about software as strategy is very valuable, because you get better, you de-risk, and hopefully, whatever the opposite of risk is, you get payoff in your strategic investments a lot more. Now, there's two more parts that we want to go over. The first one is just some thinking about how you do this, right? Because it's easy. And then the second one will be about how you kind of change over some of the practices and the mindsets and ways of thinking that people do. So the first point is that people are a little more sophisticated than this kind of straw person I'm going to paint here nowadays. But there's still a notion that if we're shipping every week or even every 4 weeks, like we don't have the time to weigh in strategically that we used to. So we're kind of going to be somewhere near chaos, right? There's going to be little accountability, and we're just going to, because there's not much guidance, people are just building stuff. We're going to hope that it sticks, right? And on the other end, as I've kind of, straw person characterized, if you're on like a 12, even 18-month cycle, if you really think about how long corporate strategy works from having nothing to kind of coming up with what to do, to study it, to do all the budgeting and planning, to roll it out to people to start doing it, for them to actually do it, and then to finally get it in front of people, moving the pixels on the screen. I would argue that takes kind of like an 18-month cycle, that full thing, is that you hope that what you originally wanted is actually useful at the end of it, right? And it involves a lot of commitments, but there actually is a very disciplined and rigorous system that you can put in place when you're doing this 1 to 4 week cycle, where you're using software as a way you're doing strategy. So, this is one framework that we at Pivotal Labs, now called Tanzu Labs, have seen be successful and used. And I've been able to sit in on a session recently where we were going through this, which was nice. And it's called the OGSM framework. It's been around for a while, I think since the 50s or so, but the Objectives, Goals, Strategies, and Metrics framework. And now, there's all sorts of frameworks for doing strategy. And before I even go over this, I think the most critical thing for following any framework or model, whether it's Agile or even Waterfall, or following DevOps or platform engineering, or following, ITEL, is to actually follow all the steps in there and do the process. I think that actually, more so than any actual process you follow, is why things don't work out well. Is you go in and you go see and you find that people aren't actually following the process. So as we go through this, keep in mind that, like, if this seems like what you're already doing, or if this seems like it has problems, or it seems like whatever, it probably seems better than not following whatever you're currently doing, which is highly likely the case. I guess that's a bit pedantic of me to be saying that, but it's just a good model to pick from. So, to give you an overview, and then I'm going to go over an example, which I think is more interesting, right? So you set an objective, and what outcome or impact, whatever word you use, what do you want to be the result of doing this strategy, right? And then you set a goal, and this is very much so like OKRs, if you're familiar with those, where you want a specific number, like some number-based thing. And I guess you could have non-number-based things, but you do need some way, like something that is, if you achieve this goal, you will know you've been successful at it, right? And then you have strategies that are paired up with metrics. Now, to be a bit of a pedant about strategy, it might be better to think of strategy as a tactic or an experiment. So, you could call it the OGT or OGE, OGM. That would be fun. But let's just go with the word strategy because that's the official word of it. But strategy is what is a thing we're going to do to try to achieve this goal? And then a metric, again, is what is a way we can track if we were right, if our experiment or our strategy was right, was the right way of doing things. Let me see. Let me move down here. So here's an example. Just a very basic example of what we have. Let me, I can't actually, my camera is right in front of that. Okay. I got to do a quick thing here to remember my narrative. Yes. Okay. Let's go back to this. Make sure I've got that lined up. Oh, just only 10 minutes. I'm not going to be able to practice all of this, but I think it's all right. So this is a very generic objective. You could even, I'm kind of smirking at it, but I think these are the kind of very high level, board level, C-level strategies that are out there. Just grow market share. Woo! What company does not have this as a strategy? We're perfectly happy where we are. We don't want to grow market share. Anyways, so you decompose that. You break that down into a goal. Okay, so what does that mean goal-wise? Well, it means that we need to have $50 million or euro, pounds, whatever you want, in sales by 2022, right? So how are we going to do that? Well, we think rather than, of all things, we could raise prices, right? We could focus on expanding existing accounts. There's all sorts of things we could do, but our theory, our tactic, our strategy is going to be, let's increase the amount of transactions we have, the amount of times we sell something, right? And then the metric that we're going to look at for this is the revenue that we get from sales, right? Not just savings that we have, but if we have more transactions, that should result in more revenue, which is the goal we have. Now, It's very high level and not too useful, but you can see that you start at the next level down, you start to decompose it, right? So you can see what we've done is we've taken the strategy, and then that rolls down to be an objective for the next layer in the organization. And their goal, and let's assume, you can see it, their goal is to have 30 million in sales for 2021, so the current year. And this might even be in a different business unit, but they're starting to figure out their responsibility for it, wherever this is going down to. And their theory might be, you can see this, their strategy, right? Their theory may be that it's too difficult to buy stuff from us, right? And any company that's ever tried to transition to selling stuff online from POs and things like that, it might actually, you might have to work with, you might have to file like a purchase order or get an invoice to purchase something. And it's just difficult versus if you went to just an online site and you could pay with a credit card, or you actually had someone like working with your purchasing department to do something, whatever it may be. It just may be difficult to sell something to someone. So what you want to look at is the metric they're going to track is that if our conversion rate goes up, it means we've removed the friction from doing sales. So you can see how we're trickling down the strategy here in a very software-oriented way, right? Like these are things that you can do with software very easily. And then finally we come down here, right, to this is maybe even at the team level that's doing the transactions here. You could think at the insurance level. This could be also that insurance example. It could kind of fit into this as well, right? That there's something wrong with our checkout flow. Maybe it has 8 steps that you have to go through. Maybe you have to refill out your address each time or whatever, right? Maybe it would be better if we integrated with Apple Pay and just had them pay with that instead of having to enter credit card information. And they're going to target getting some more sales in a 3-month cycle. And the metric they're going to track is, that let me see, reduce shopping cart abandonment rate. Let me reduce this. Speaking of reducing, there we go. So that's one way they can measure that is we see a lot of too many abandoned shopping carts. And if we are removing friction from sales by optimizing the checkout flow, there should be less abandoned carts, which is going to bubble all the way up to we remove friction from the experience. It's hopefully giving us more sales, and that will allow us to increase the transaction volume, right? So what you see is in the OGSM framework, you can start with a somewhat vague thing, though I would argue the less vague it is, the better it's going to be for you. I'm not sure what happened there. Oh. I got so excited that one of my pictures that I need to frame fell down. But you can see that there's a mapping of strategies to what the objective for the next level is. And then it breaks down blah, 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 all of this, right? And I think there's a few things that are important to pay attention to here. One, there's an effect that you get here, and that's also important that I forget if this is in like the classic OGSM thing, but one of the things we in Pivotal Labs, now called Tanzu Labs, really emphasize is you need to have a person responsible for it. I forget if at Amazon they still do the single-threaded leader thing. I think they do. I think that superseded the 2-pizza thing. That's something about the magic of Amazon you always have to be leery of is they actually change some of these things over time. So I don't think they do the 2 pizzas anymore. If you're just now putting that into place, you should update what they've found their best practices are. And then you're also delegating how something is accomplished, right? As down to the people actually doing it, closer to the people who are doing the work. But one thing I think also to keep in mind, there's 2 other things, is as you get more and more data and more validation about what your tactics are, right? What your theories are, you can use software to gather that data, and it should even go back up the chain, if not in your own little level here. As you are experimenting and seeing if your strategies work, if you've chosen the right way to achieve your objectives and your high-level corporate strategy, you should change and adapt, right? Like you shouldn't feel that you're wed to the same sort of thing. Like you might discover something totally new that will reach the higher level objectives that you have. So one of the things you could see at each of these levels. So another part of governance that we at Pivotal Labs, now called Tanzu Labs, have found is that putting this idea of a growth board in place, right? Like a small set of people, usually someone who is from finance, usually someone from the business, and usually the technical people, a product manager, even a developer or something like that. you have growth boards, as you can kind of see at various levels here. And whether it's at a quarterly basis, I think that's a kind of good steady state, but maybe you start off at a monthly basis, they almost act kind of like your board, like your investment board at this level, to be a function to review the progress, to even review what's in your OGSM block there, right? And so putting in place these growth boards, which you can read more about, I realize you can't click on it there, but you get these slides, you can click on it. But they are part of the governance process of what's going on there. And they're how you start to get that governance and, again, get that ownership and responsibility of how you're doing things. So then at this point, we're just kind of closing out with some practices. I don't really have that much time left, so I'm not going to go over it. I'm going to do a little reviewing here. I think, I'm always concerned that I don't have enough detail to go over things. And that's a combination of, one, I like to jam a lot of things, and often I don't actually know that well what I'm talking about. I'm more just trying to bring some ideas to people for them to delve in more. And then also, of course, it'd be great if they worked with us to get all of the details done. But I like as I've learned more and more about this OGSM thing, all strategy frameworks are flawed. Just some are flawed better than others. But it is good. It kind of like fits the frustration I always have with strategy, which is like I was kind of going over with this slide, is like, that's a great strategy, but I have no idea what to do, and you haven't demonstrated that you are aware of what can be done, right? Like, I think that's an important thing. I think just kind of explaining to executives how software is done would be an interesting sort of ongoing project. But then, we'll go over kind of like agile practices, how things are done. And then Brian will go over like the infrastructure area. This is one of his slides. And then we'll quickly go over like what kind of some actual things we have to sell there, which is always an important part of a presentation done for commercial purposes, what you could give us money for. And then, I don't always do this, but this is a pretty good call to action as far as if you fill out this form, you can get a free consultation to help us to get Tanzu Labs, formerly Pivotal Labs, to help you out with things. Well, like I said, I got to go to, we actually have a live spring event next week. Thankfully not conflicting with this webinar, and I have to go we use some new system to broadcast it, so I've got to go make sure all of my stuff logs in well. Let me actually show that to you. I mean, if you have watched this video this long, you will probably like this. It's a Spring 1 tour, October 17th. It's not just like, it's actually a lot of talks. It's kind of like a simulation of going to Spring 1 if you weren't able to do that in person. And you can see that I've got a talk going over platform stuff. This is Europe time. I think it's like 9 Eastern. I don't know. But it's totally free to attend. You should check that out. You just go to spring1tour.io. And with that, thanks for watching. I was not looking forward to forcing myself rehearsing this, and I was farting around eating lunch, making sure I had all my certifications that I need, things like that. But it was actually fun. It's a good reminder that I enjoy doing these things. So we'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.